just going to say something about chip drying. Drum dryers are one of the most common ways of drying chips in particle board manufacture. It's all about quality control. You want the chips to be not completely dry, but because you want a bit of flexibility in them, particularly if you're going to make MDF, you want to have this certain amount of this sort of viscoelastic property that I discussed when I was talking about mechanical properties when you're manufacturing MDF, so that the chips give a little when the two plates are rubbing against each other. And you want the same sort of property when you're pressing a board. You want a little bit of give in those chips to make sure that the furnish that you create on the surface, so you can squeeze out the air basically, so you get a nice uniform finish. But if you've got too much, that's going to affect the operation of the refiners in the MDF manufacture, and it's going to affect the operation of the board pressing of particles, because a lot of moisture is going to create a lot of steam, and if you're trying to press a board in a large, very wide press, the steam can't get out, and then you end up with blows. Basically, you get little pockets where the steam localizes, and then bang, it just blows a hole in the furnish, which you don't want. So chip drying is a very important part of the process. There's different types of drum dryer. This one that I've shown here has an angle on it so that the chips are fed in, and as this rotates, the chips will kind of tumble down and drop out the end. But running against that is a counter-current airflow of warm air, so that steam is coming out that end and chips are coming out that end. You have to balance this quite carefully, because if you're not careful, you'll be blowing chips out that end. In any case, you're going to have some sort of system here to collect debris that's inevitably going to come out of this system. You might have a filter, or you might have something called a cyclone. I'll talk about the operation of a cyclone separately. So that's one type. Another type would use a drum that isn't moving, but it's got a series of heated tubes in it, and that is actually rotating within the drum, and again you'll have an airflow through that, or you might have an angle on it. So there's different types of design. You can also have air drying, because I showed air classifiers. You can have similar sorts of arrangements where the chips are fed in, you have air, and as the warm air goes up through these towers, the chips will dry off. There's different ways of doing this arrangement, but one thing you can do is to make sure that as the chips dry, obviously they get light and they might get blown out through the top or something like that. You can control, smaller chips are going to dry more quickly, so you can actually control the drying much more effectively in such systems. You could also combine this with some sort of classification system if you wished. So the inevitable result of these sorts of systems, particularly if you're going to use some sort of air drying system, is that you've got to separate the chips from the steam. You might have quite a high airflow, and there's been a move in the industry to move to high temperature drying, which speeds up the drying process but inevitably leads to the risk of fire. Particle board and MDF plants are notorious for having fires. It's just an inevitable part of the process, and it's usually the chip dryer that's responsible for that happening. So one way of handling this, you're going to have particles coming out, you're going to have steam coming out, you're going to have air coming out. If you take that flow and you put it into something that looks like this, you've probably, if you've seen a particle board plant, you've seen these quite big structures which have this conical shape. Basically the chips, because they're heavier than the air, are going to hit the side of this, and they're going to want to do that. They're going to lose energy and they're going to drop out the bottom. However, the steam and the air isn't going to be doing that. It's going to come out of the easiest escape route possible. So when you go to particle board mills, you probably see these large conical structures with a lot of steam coming out the top, and those are called cyclones. Very clever devices. So they just take the centrifugal energy of these chips, and by the chips spinning, hitting the side of this, they lose energy and drop out. So you could even use something like this as some sort of classification system if you wanted to be really clever. It was when building one of these in his factory that the famous Mr. Dyson came up with the idea for his vacuum cleaners, which we all know and love.